Ginger, how did you first become aware of Treasure? Because you definitely knew her the most out of the three of us.
Well, I've always known about Anvil. When I went to UW, one of my classmates interned at Anvil and had a really, really good experience, both with the work that Anvil happened to have at that time, and in particular, learning from Greg and Treasure. And I think that was... I took it for granted at the time. It's just oh yeah, you had a cool internship. I was no, those are really cool people. And not every internship puts you in touch with people like that have an interesting process, that are great examples of designers and people,
I think it says so much about them that even with their tiny approach and team, they have interns. They care so much about education. I don't know. I think that's hard to imagine that they have the bandwidth to do all of the training and managing, and that it's still that important to them. It's cool.
Yeah.
Well, she was interns are really cool, and they bring a cool point of view, and they do good work. Not everyone sees interns like that. There are totally people who see intern programs as a time sink and a burden, because it feels like you have to take care of someone, as opposed to recognizing the potential that an intern program can have.
That's a great point.
Yeah, maybe this is something you can do if you decided to stay boutique instead of growing. You have support, but you mindfully not take all the projects you could, and you still have this time span, and you have this energy, and you can put it into bringing someone up to speed and learn from them, be open into learning from them. Just because it's not a huge corporation where interns make coffee, it's this little studio where every person counts. And as much as interns learn from them, as much Treasure is open to see what's up in the AD world, what the new generation is doing. How can I help them, but also what I can learn from them.
Hey, welcome to the Beyond Rave podcast with the Seattle Women in Design Group. I'm Kate, and today I'm hanging with Ginger and Margaret, the other members of my board. And I'm going to kick it over to Ginger to introduce our guest today.
I'm super pleased to welcome Treasure Hinds to the show today. We've been trying to get her on the podcast for a little while to talk about all her exciting work at Anvil Studios, an absolute mainstay of the Seattle design scene.
Oh.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Anvil's been around Seattle over 10 years now.
Yeah.
Collected a vast number of awards under their belt and launched countless products.
Yeah.
Thank you again so much for joining us today, Treasure. If you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Treasure Hinds. I am one half of Anvil Studios. We're a boutique industrial design studio in Seattle. But prior to starting Anvil, I had about 10 years experience in the design field that I think really influenced starting Anvil. Anvil's turning 14 this year, so it's quite an achievement, but there's definitely previous experience that helped lead me to where I am. I'm a graduate from Western Washington University, so Seattle local. And when I graduated Western, I graduated just before the turn of the century, so a little old school. And my goal had been my dream had been to work in San Francisco, because at that time, that's where design was really booming and happening. So when I left Western, I moved to California and spent about 5 years there in the Bay Area. Worked really hard, got my dream job at Frog Design. I worked there for a couple of years. And that was amazing. I mean, Frog was a really cool place. My contemporaries were all just designers who've gone on to become really kind of design leaders in the community. It's neat to have had that experience working with them. But also the clients at that time, working at Frog, I had a lot of really A-list clients, and it was a really intense couple of years. Learned a lot about designing fast, coming up to speed fast. And when I left that job, I thought a lot about diversity of portfolio and what I wanted to do, what experience. And I intentionally did a shift. And when I left Frog, I went to a company called Design Affairs, which is they're an in-house corporate design group from Siemens. And I spent a couple of years focusing on medical. And it was a really strong, divergent experience from the previous time in Silicon Valley. There I was concentrating on medical devices and projects that were like multiple years rather than a couple of weeks, right? And then during that time, I was working on the U.S. office, but once or twice a year, I would go over and work in the German studio for a couple of weeks. And that exposure of working abroad was really a huge growth for me. On the weekends, I would go hiking in the Swiss Alps or something, and I have just really fell in love with traveling. And growing up, I had done some traveling with my family, but to do it on your own independently became a big focus. So after I spent 3 years there, I was determined, like, I want to make traveling more of my life, and how can I use design and travel together? And I found that with that experience of going overseas and working in Germany, like, it's, why can't I use design and live somewhere else? So I set my sights on China because it was very diverse. And then I've worked in Europe, I've worked in America, and I thought, well, that gives me a really nice blend of different design philosophies. It helps with again, back to my core about wanting diverse experiences. I worked in consumer electronics for 5 years in the Bay Area, and then worked in medical for 3 years. So I went to Shanghai for a couple of years and worked in a consultancy there. And that was crazy because then I'm working on big, it's similar to consultancy. So I'm still working on projects, but the working a different language broke my brain. But then getting to infuse that with the travel. And again, I spent some time there and then decided to, it's not a real term, but I've become a design nomad, where I decided to use design to be a freelancer at different places. So then I took a contract at another company in Shanghai, and then moved back to San Francisco and did a contract at Astra for a while, and then did a contract at Microsoft. And I just kind of used design as a way to live in different places for a bit. And then around my 10-year mark, that leads me to around 10 years out of school, I was like, okay, I just did a decade of designing in very different environments, designing very different products, and all around the world. Now, like, I was like a chapter, and that's when, anytime I was in Seattle, Greg and I would always get together for beers, and we just talk design and talk shop. And he was at a point in his career where he was starting his own thing as well. And we're like, well, we're both here, let's just do this together. We've always, gotten along very well design-wise, and it was just the right fit. He was also around a decade out, and we were kind of reflecting on our experiences over that. And while I'd always been very intentional about having a diverse approach to how I took projects or jobs, he had as well, but it was totally different from what I had done. He had done a lot more in-house than I had done. He had done a lot more through being in-house. He'd done a lot of trips to Asia to manufacturing. And while I spent time living over there, I hadn't been to factories that much. And so we just found that both of us, having spent 10 years working for people, for other companies, they really just blended together and balanced really well in a way that allowed us to, when we started going for clients, he had housewares, I had consumer electronics, he had fitness, I had medical, and it just blended so seamlessly. And that literally just led to the natural formation of Anvil. And there we are today.
I love that you both kind of independently were working on two halves of the recipe that makes Anvil. Can you tell us a little bit more about Anvil Studios itself?
Yes. So Anvil, we are a 2-person boutique design firm in Seattle. And we like to say we're boutique because we actually are 14 years old. And I don't know how that happened, because in my head, I still feel like we're still in that 5-year mark. Greg and I are old design buddies from university. And after university, we went in our different ways. And anytime we were in the same town with each other, we meet up for beers. And like anytime we just, sit around talking, like our philosophies were always right in step, even though where we went were really divergent in our backgrounds. And just when we started Anvil, we thought we would do this. We thought we were creating something where it'd be like, it'd just be some friends. It'd be us, bring some other friends in, and it would grow. So that's why we picked a name that felt like it was bigger, right? So we made a really intentional decision, actually, a couple of years in, that we were like, we actually like being small. We like being the two of us. We like still staying in the design trenches. I didn't think of a better way to talk about that, but we like keeping the creative. Like, we don't want to be people who are telling other people what to design, or find ourselves that we're spending all of our time looking for work and worrying about work, and rather we are in design because I like to draw, I like to do 3D CAD, I like to sit around and talk about ideas and figure out what works and do the whole part of the process. So at that point, it was somewhere around, ironically, around the 5-year mark where we decided, no, this is us. This is what we are, and we just want to stay small. Allows us to be nimble, allows us to try new things, go somewhere, allows us to weather really bad economies. We don't have to downsize. This is us. That said, though, we do have a really good network of, at this point, principal level designers that we really rely on when we do have projects that are bigger than just the two of us can handle. And it's the same sort of, it's the same people that we've been working with here. So we still do have a nice collective. It's just they are more plug-in as we need them on specific projects rather than being here as overhead through the whole thing, if that makes sense. So
it does make sense.
I guess that's our scope.
It makes sense, but this is an interesting choice with nowadays economy and like this pressure to grow and be bigger and bigger and bigger.
I am not a good marketing person, but I feel like when you meet people who are like, why Anvil over someone else? And I think it's about that personal relationship. You like us, you like the fact that we're small, because there are other people who are bigger, and there are the bigger groups, and they do great. I've worked at bigger groups. For us, it is a very intentional decision that there was a period where several years ago, I was pregnant with I have one child. And during that time, I just couldn't physically do the workload. So we had employees around and we grew to a 4-person studio. And that was great. And those are two of my favorite designers on the planet. But in the core of my heart, like what I want, I didn't enjoy managing a project and having somebody else do the work. It's fun to have all that. I love the collaboration. I love having lots of designers on the project and putting everything up and looking at it. But I personally, I need to be involved in that. I'm not happy when I step away and I'm assessing somebody else's work only and then directing them where to go, for example. It is a hard decision. It's something that Craig and I spend a lot of time and a lot of years talking over, because I think the idea of success is growth. And when you choose to not grow, what does that mean?
It's a different way to seeing success. And I think the fact that we see success only in like growth, because you had a lot of personal growth, your studio for sure grew over this 14 years. But the growth in terms of like how many employees or like how big clients, I think it's something from the 90s. Right now,
I am from the 90s. What do you say?
No, we're all from the 90s. In a way. It's just this idea that the only way to succeed is to go up. And sometimes the way to succeed is like to know your limits, know what you're good at, know what you want to do.
Know what makes you happy.
Yeah. And don't get pressured by what you see as a model.
It's definitely just one route. I mean, that's, like you said, most design groups want to grow and have larger teams. And that's definitely, a very successful, that's what they're supposed to do. So I said, that's where we came to terms with them. We decided we didn't want that for ourselves. So I guess everyone has their mountain. I guess our mountain is we're a boutique. And it allows us a lot of flexibility that way. We don't need more than 3 projects at a time to keep us busy. The COVID came and we didn't have mouths we had to worry about feeding, for example, right? So the pain in that we aren't going to be a large company that people know about is rewarded for us in a way that we get to be the ones designing, and we don't have that stress of it being something bigger. It's just that for us, it's creating the lifestyle that we want as part of that. And it's definitely not for everybody. I mean, I'm not trying to lecture. I'm just saying that's for us. And we didn't get there easily. I mean, when we first started out, we thought that, well, how do we start and how do we grow and all that? And I think it was 2012 when we just sat down and started talking about we've been doing this for 4 years now. It was a multi-year, we worked with, at the time, one of our main contractors was a business strategist or a design strategist. And so lots of talks with Michelle about this stuff and just understanding who the other small groups are, what are they, everyone has a differentiator, everyone has a mountain, right? And we're like, that's all of these things, like it's fantastic, it's great. I know so many designers that I love and respect, and we decided in our gut, this is what we want. So
right, and I think that especially more recently, success is measured by a certain aspect of like nimbleness, right?
Yes,
and
that is one of our words,
right? But it's a skill. Like you've totally had to learn and perfect it, right? Would you say that that's something that you've sort of honed as a hallmark skill of Anvil?
Nimbleness I think we've always wanted to be nimble because I don't actually have a good clear answer for that, but I do know we say we're small and nimble.
I was curious, you gave us a little window into the origins of you and Greg working together over and over again every time you were in the same place as each other. But what was the decision like to start Anvil? How big of a moment was that, or did it sort of subtly creep into being more and more solid,
totally. Well, so I know for Greg, he had known since university that he wanted to do his own thing someday. I never had that vision. I really wanted just to experience a bunch of different things. I came out of school. I remember when you graduate, I don't know, it just seems like everyone would be like, well, what is it you want to design? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't have an answer. I'm not a car person. I'm not a chair person. I'm not, I really love the process. And so I would usually de facto to like, well, I love coffee. I'd like to design coffee. But it was just like a answer. And really what I found out through my various experiences was like, that really actually is my answer. Is I love the process. And when I first started out, my old college professor, who was now a good friend of mine and probably my main mentor in life, way back in the day, he was like, you're not just designing a product, right? You're designing your lifestyle, you're designing your career. It's not just a portfolio. Your portfolio represents your product design skills, so your portfolio also looks like it needs to be designed. But you also need to think about like be intentional, right? Like, where are you going to work? I came into school with enough knowledge to get a job. And so like my first job out of school was I went to the Bay Area because I just wanted to be in it. So like Silicon Valley and San Francisco was just, I think it still is, but it was just when I graduated in the late 90s, that was just a design mecca. And that first job really is where I learned how other people design, how you design professionally. Like in school, you're learning the process, and you go and you have to learn, what does that mean to do the process in 2 weeks on a product you've never heard of? What happens, when you're now on a team of 5 other people who are amazing artists, and you all have good ideas. Now, how do you come up and how do you work with them? But also then how do you communicate and stand up for your ideas in front of them and all these things? And again, you only have 2 weeks or it's 4 weeks, and so I got this like pretty extreme, I felt like at the time, just like I felt like I was in boot camp. I was like learning all the time, every time from all these different amazing people in consumer electronics and in, mainly a lot of consumer electronics down in Prague. And then after that, I was pretty burnt out, because I had been living 20-hour days for so long, trying to really just design. And it took some time off, and I thought about, well, thinking back to what Della told me about, design is more than just the product you're working on. Like, look at your process or your life, right? From there, I went to Siemens Medical because it was a complete opposite from this very fast-paced, like every project in Silicon Valley, like the clients were huge names, right? Everything was very exciting. And I went from there to Siemens, where I was like, I have 18-month-long projects now, and my user is not my patient, is not the client, and like the complexities and the depths. And I guess there's this kind of typical T, like, do you go broad or you go deep? And after 5 years, I had a really good breadth, but I didn't really have too much depth. And so countering that with going from a consultancy in the Bay Area to in-house design for medical where it's really, really, really deep. And at the end of 3 years, you might have 1 or 2 products.
Right. If you're lucky.
Quick question. Having these experiences, what is more your style? I mean, obviously you started your own consultancy, so that answers the question. But like, what are your thoughts after like experiencing one after another?
That is hard. I think the answer is it's really nice to have a hybrid. It's really nice to have some experiences because sometimes, like even today, having like a 3-week-long consumer electronics project, it's just fun. It's just, you get to spend some time on Pinterest. You get to look around Gizmodo. You get to be on Course 77. You're just like, oh, I love what I see here. And these are the ideas of today because this product will be, it's about right now. You don't have to worry about 10 years from now. Right? There's no longevity or classic, right? You just need to like, what just feels right? What's comfortable? What's fun? But then we have life science projects, which will be, 6 months long for a system. And we have to interview users and technicians and understand what the system is now. What can we do to improve the experience for the actual person in the lab using it? And then knowing that this product is not going to be on the counter for like 6 months. It's going to be there for like 10 years. So those designs tend to be a lot more actually classic, but there's a lot of stuff in that world that's from the 80s and it looks very dated. So there also has to be something that's intrinsically beautiful and interesting about it. And because the company is doing 1 or 2 in the next 5 years, they want it to stand out and be iconic. So it's this nice blend of like something also really sculptural. So a lot of times we're talking about how do you balance that timelessness of Braun and Apple with something that's unique and eye-catching and sense of beautiful. So I really like having exposure to both at this point, which I think is why this is a good fit for me personally.
You just made me really curious to think about what little design details and elements we think are going to look really like 2020 in a while. What do you think?
Oh my gosh. I don't know, because a lot of what we think is kind of like classic today has roots in like 2004, 2005 Apple, right? And while they have roots in Braun from the 60s, when you put Apple next to Braun, Apple still is timeless, but still beautiful and modern for today.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because they have machined aluminium.
I know, they're beautiful. I love mine.
Okay, answering to your question, what is like 2020 design like? Everyone made a face mask. That's the yes, that's the thing.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, that's an object that we went a little hard on.
Well, yeah, at Treasure, you started already talking about it, but what we really wanted to ask you is like, how is the day-to-day life in a studio like?
It's pretty collaborative. And it's kind of interesting because I know one of your other questions was how has design changed? And the answer, I have kind of an answer to both of those questions here, which is like, COVID really changed how we work, we being Greg and I. But we still, what's always been really core to us is just being really collaborative, but then also having that time where we can like shut down and go somewhere and be by yourself and kind of turn and burn on stuff. So it's interesting because when you say how's it in the studio, I immediately think back to our studio, before we did lockdown, which is funny because it's been 3 years. And we were always like CAD jockeying each other. We split everything 50-50. We're both 50-50 partners. When projects come in, unless things are really crazy, we try really hard to not say, this is your project, that's my project, but really have us both tackling design projects together and then being able to kind of sit back and look at everything that we've come up with.
That was a really interesting thing about splitting things 50-50 because I was going to ask about like how responsibilities are shared with Greg and in terms of just like the leadership of the studio and also the, boots on the ground work. It's great to hear that it's 50-50. How do people do that? Like, what's the nitty gritty of it?
Oh, it is a lot of talking and arguing and trust. There's a lot of trust too. It's interesting. Again, back to pre-COVID, it was a lot more natural just because we were always in the same space when we were working together, and we could sit around and sketch, get the sketches printed off. I was still old school. Even after sketching on tablets, I really had this, when we had our physical space, I was always getting our sketches printed off. Anytime our contractors would send in work, I'd make sure everything was printed off. And it's such a waste of paper, but I'd have everything up with this 14-foot wide white wall. And I would just like to hang everything up and then just kind of sit there and like meditate and drool on it and cut everything up and put over here, and then take the imagery we have from our inspiration boards and put them over there, and just like kind of like make a big mess and pull it together and just have this conversation and discussion about it. Use a red marker and say, "No, I don't like that," or something. But it's a lot more difficult to do virtually. Luckily, by the time COVID shut us down, we had already been working for 10 years. So we kind of pretty comfortable, I guess, in that space, and we were able to figure out how to make it work. And we still sit on like 8-hour-a-day Skype sessions, essentially. I just put one screen over here and he just kind of sits there and I can just talk to him like we're in the same room. We just can't walk around to each other's computer and point at something and say, "No, change that. No, that radius is too big." Things like that.
Do you think it's uncommon for small studios like this to divvy things up so equally?
Yeah, I don't know. The other designers I know are people like Josh at Tactile, and he has a big studio, so I don't know other two-person design studios.
Maybe you're a unicorn.
Oh, I mean, there's plenty out there. They're not in my social circles, I guess. Did I answer the question? I feel like I missed the question somewhere.
Maybe it speaks to how much of it can't be like theorized around. You can't just keep talking about it and be academic about it. It really is that you and Greg just do the work. And no one says, "This one's mine." It's not possessive either, right? Like, you're very sharing about it. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that reminds me. When we first started off, he'd come from a place where, like, a lot of times his design team, because he had more corporate experience than I did, and they would be kind of siloed. Like, this is your project, that's this person's project, that's this person's project. And whereas I came from a more consultancy background where everybody puts theirs on the wall, but then you're competitive because you're like, "Oh, well, my idea's like this," and so it was interesting difference that we had coming in. And so we both wanted to kind of, not that those were negative, but that's where we both had come from. And we wanted something different. We were doing this because we liked hanging out together. We liked design, we liked the process. So when we first started, one of the things we really challenged ourselves to do was to not do either of that. What we would do is we would do our sketches and then go through and decide what ones should be moved into CAD. And then when we moved them into CAD, we would swap them. So I would be building his idea, his sketch, and he'd be building mine in CAD, so that we get that kind of cross-pollination without really arguing. But you see different things in the sketches. So, like he obviously would have his idea of what he's looking at, and I'd have my idea. And by swapping them, I would have a fresh look on what he was doing, and vice versa. But then through that, we would still then talk.
That's so interesting. You mean no one ever says you built that wrong? You didn't build it like I thought?
Well, we argue all the time.
Oh, okay. That's part of the process.
Sorry, we discuss it all the time.
Right.
Yeah, that is the first thought, that you would have a lot of critique for, like, "No, you didn't build it exactly how I drew this corner." And you would be like, "Well, this way is got an advantage." So it's cool to switch because, you have to become like, it kind of forces some cooperation. Yeah.
It's probably what we should be doing in our teams at work. But it's often hard to be there because it's just so much easier to do everything. Well, it's not so much easier to do everything yourself, but it's definitely less hassle to just have your sketch, have your model, then fight for it during the critique when we pick the keepers for the project. But it's probably much better to just share this work that way, within your team, within your environment, with other designers.
It is definitely more fun. And that was something, like, this goes back 8 years ago now, but back again when we had our employees, we had the 2 employees that were supporting us for about a year and a half. They're from a different generation than we are. We graduated in the late 90s and they graduated, 2010, 2011. And I remember just being so profoundly impressed with how collaborative they were. They were constantly just, there was no ownership. It was just about the ideas. We were like, we hadn't voiced it that way, but I felt like the generation I was from was just much more mine, yours, a little more competitive. And I love this feeling that it's just much more optimistic and happy and enjoyable to have that approach. That's what we learned. Like, we were trying to do that, but seeing that just natural with those two designers was just so inspiring.
So maybe that's what the future looks like.
It's a quality I feel that the millennial generation has that was very different from, I'm Gen X, right? And that's very much this, for me, it was always kind of exhausting. It was always fighting.
I'm also impressed that you can bring in new designers and then they follow your model so well, or I guess you're saying they even add to it in their own way instead of like bringing them in to like apply a very particular skill or like thing. You just bring them in and they work with you kind of on everything the same way that you and Greg already work together. Wow, that's so cool. I love that. Shifting gears a little bit, I think something that a lot of people are very curious about, in design school is what is really important for people to know about starting their own consultancy and how to set themselves up for success best and how to avoid pitfalls. So, I don't know, I think it's important to have pitfalls because it's so important to learn from them. Just like in the design process, right? You want to fail because it is part of the process. And I think treating the experience of either starting your own thing or not starting your own thing and just looking at your experiences in your resume as a whole as a design process, I think it's important to know that failure is okay, right? And it's not only okay, it's necessary. There's some really good basic things. Hire a CPA, hire a lawyer. Don't try to do things that aren't in designer's wheelhouse. Like when we first started, we had like Fridays set aside for invoicing. Oh my God, it would break my brain. It would take me an entire day. And we had a friend who was a bookkeeper and she's like, I'm $35 an hour, but I can save you money. Just here, I'll teach you how to do it. And like after like several months of it being like, I could have just spent the whole day like designing and that actually might generate income that would allow me to pay them $35 an hour because maybe this would only take her like an hour or two. And I would just get so frustrated and angry. And just shifting gears was so painful. So yeah, it's important to fail. Just things like that. You don't need to put yourself, if it's not in our wheelhouse, get a CPA. Lawyers are pretty, I think, important. Just make sure, I know you can download legalese off the internet, but find somebody who they will set you up. They'll give you terms. They know a lot of times before you start with a client, before you start a project, a client, has all these terms, and I don't know what those mean. Again, we would sit there and we would try to go through and read everything. And legalese is just like I like to sketch, right? Like that's just not how my brain is wired. So really just knowing that those two things I think are really important. And then I met a designer at the IDC actually, who is a design studio down in Portland, and he was saying he hires a copywriter. I felt like, oh my God, that's a great idea. Because just like I feel passionate about hiring out those other things, I don't know how to write. I should be hiring a copywriter. That sounds really brilliant.
It's comforting to hear that we don't need to know how to do it all.
Yeah, we should hire a copywriter for the podcast.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Our copy is magnificent. I'm doing part of it. I wonder because I think those are like typical things you hear when you talk about like how to start your own thing. How about finding clients? Imagine you were in college. How did you get your first client? It's always like the biggest obstacle.
Well, what you don't do, which is what I did, was I didn't tell anybody I was starting. I just thought I'm just going to quietly do the work and then people will know. And if it's good enough, I'll get clients. And that is not the right way to do it. You should just tell everybody you're doing it and people will, people who you work with will want to work with you. Yeah, that's a pitfall I would avoid. I also, obviously, because my experience, I'm pretty opinionated about this one. I don't do it alone. Having a design partner, having somebody who is like, because design, you can get stuck in a rabbit hole. It's really nice to have somebody you can bounce ideas off of, even if it's like, how do we talk to this client? Or, we'll be on projects and I'm like, I just don't get it. What am I missing here? And luckily so far in our history, one of us gets it when we're in a situation where somebody doesn't get it. The other one's like, don't worry, I got this one, and then we'll talk about it later and explain it later. But having a sounding board that is also designed that it's your other, I don't know, that's imperative for me, for us. I think it's also important to not try to do this right out of school, but to go and get experience. For me personally, it was all about getting a diversity of experience. So I think that's great, but I think there's so much that you learn in school, but there's still so much more to learn, and why not learn it and get paid to learn it for a couple of years? So even if it's things like learning how to run a photo shoot, why do that on your own time? Photographers are expensive, so do that through a job, right? And then when you are paying for it, you're already comfortable with the experience.
This is a really good angle for people who are impatient, because you have to learn the things. Obviously, you have to learn them while doing them, but you can as well just be paid when you mess them up for someone else, and then you know how to do it better for your own.
Yeah. And it's also, I think I've been really fortunate. I've had some really amazing coworkers over the years, and you learn so much from other people. Whether you learn, I would never do it that way, or, oh my God, that person has such a great that resonates with me, and you adopt that philosophy. There's so much that if you're not doing that, you're kind of robbing yourself of that experience of getting that outside perspective, which because it changes you, right? Again, back to the process of design is more than just designing a product. Going through that experience is changing you and your own philosophy and just maturing your thought and approach.
Absolutely. I want to ask more about something you said a moment ago, which was just that you didn't tell anybody you were starting this. You're obviously a very humble person, which I think is beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
But also, how have you learned in your career to balance the humility with, needing to promote yourself?
Maybe social media helps with that. It's pretty easy just to throw something up on LinkedIn and say, hey, look at our new product.
Yeah.
And then through LinkedIn, I've created a list of people I'm connected with. So I'll just email. I have a newsletter, right? Anyone you meet and you get a business card, I'll put on a newsletter, and if they're like, you can unsubscribe if you don't want to hear about what we're doing. But we're a small group, and we send out 2 a year. So we don't really advertise or anything. So I don't really know how we get the word. I think we just kind of do, and then.
Yeah, your work clearly speaks for itself. There's no doubt about that.
Kind of a boring answer to your question. I think
it's not boring.
It's a bit of I don't want to say going through the motions, because that sounds a little bit disingenuous or something. But you're sort of earnestly doing these little things here and there. Social media is kind of like that, right? That it's very curating here and there, lots of maintaining. It's like you have a museum or something, and you keep cleaning it, you keep refreshing it, you keep making it so that it's interesting.
And some people are so good where they're every week doing stuff, and I try to spend on time on LinkedIn just to kind of see what designers are doing, and people will just, I did this design, isn't it beautiful? And then a week later, here's another picture, isn't this great? And I'm like, God, that's a great idea. I post it once and then I forget about it because I told the world. But yeah, this idea of just sharing. Because it's not in your face, it's for people who are going there and they're seeing it just because they're there seeing. And I need to learn more.
It's a different skill and one more person to hire. We should be doing more of this ourselves. Looking at myself right now, since I'm doing the social media. but it's a science. It's a science how to understand promoting content.
Wow. And how many things do you have saved that are just you're fully intending to share them or post them, and then you just they just sit in the folder that says this is going to be posted? That's my, yeah.
too many. That's why I started doing these like, well, I just kind of add 4 now. It's just easier because I'm like, because I don't want to like send an email every like month. I think people would kind of then stop. So now I just kind of, well, it's been a while. Let's see. Let's put all these forward here and let's just tell everybody now.
That's clearly the way that a lot of people have shifted too. I mean, now I feel like you just get seasonal, like, here's everything I did in the last few months, like, take it or leave it, you know? That's just how we feel.
Yeah.
You talked about it already a little bit, but how did Anvil change over these years? Because now you have a pretty mature design studio, but like a lot of changes happen in between, like, and even COVID impact most recently.
When we first started, we were so fixated on design that we spent so much time working on the design. And then the night before, we would worry about, oh, well, what's the story we're telling? Because we spent all this time on design. Now, in our 11th hour, we're tired and we're trying to write words around why the designs are important. And then, oh, it's 11 p.m. and we need to make a booklet and Kinko's closes at midnight. And oh my gosh, it's like Monday night. All of these things are just too much churn. And what's been really nice is that with everything being digital, I don't need to go to Kinko's anymore. We don't have physical deliverables unless it's a 3D print. And then the other thing is, as we're moving through the design process, we are identifying the story while we're designing. Whereas when we first began, we spent so much time worrying about the individual designs that when we got to the how the story came together and what's the presentation to the client would be like the last 10%, and it was exhausting. And so, because then you're like, well, now that I see this, I kind of wish I'd put on something else. Well, there's no time. Okay, we just got to get this out. We got to talk about it. But understanding, again, taking that step back, understanding that this is a process. So the design doesn't need to be perfect in the individual incarnation. What's important is that we're working through the process to make the design perfect at the end. So in the beginning, getting that gesture, like, what do we want to talk about now? Here's all the designs. Well, let's understand what we're thinking about and craft the story around those. And then as the week progresses or as we get closer to the deadline, we're filling in the holes of that story through the design rather than trying to create a story at the end after we did like 50 sketches and how do they work together? It's creating some content, getting an idea, and then as we refine the content, it's being refined with the story at the same time, with the idea that, again, this whole thing we're working on now is just part of the process. Because what we really want to know is find out from the client what's working, what's not working, what did we not understand, what did we understand, and then we'll take that away and then we synthesize and we do that whole process again, understanding, again, this next time it's not going to be perfect because it's still just a sketch. Let's just make sure we're progressing it forward and we're getting closer to what that final solution needs to be. But balancing the design and the story through the process and knowing where you are in the process rather than the stress we used to put on ourselves to get the design just perfect. And that, every time in that first time, like it's not, because you're not going to know as much as the client knows. So you need to give them ideas for them to react to, for them to tell you what isn't working, and then synthesize that and then give them more ideas to find out, okay, is this closer now? Still what's not working? What's still, and just really, really allowing the process and the story that you're crafting to be allowed to develop through the process, right? Trusting that process. Otherwise, I remember these really stomach aches, these horrible late nights of being down to the last wire. And why did we plan the presentation for on Monday? That just means I have to work all weekend. Like relaxing all of that and focusing on the work.
Yeah, like it's so distilled. That's what it sounds like.
It also sounds like the key word is patience. Patience to start your own thing and patience to do the process the right thing, to not design the final product before you're in a place where you're supposed to do that.
Ooh. Yeah, because you need to, again, back to this idea of failure, like you need to know what's not working because you don't want to spend any more time on it. So why spend a lot of budget there trying to get that just right if the client's like, oh my God, I don't even like that direction. Cool, great. Let's get out of there and go to this next one. Let's not even worry about that. Tear it down. I do like them to tell us what they hate because then I want to know I can stay away from it.
That makes sense. Do you feel like you can follow a pretty similar process with most of your clients, or do you have to kind of read the room on how much they're diving into different areas with you and then like do it a different way?
It's definitely, there's definitely clients that you have a really nice relationship with it. It just seems like, oh, they get it. This is easy. One client where we'll just send a presentation without even having the call right then. Just be like, okay, here's this next thing, take a look and we'll talk. And then when we do talk, it's like 10 minutes. I'm like, great, I got it. Good. Okay. I'll get that going. We'll get that back to you next week. And I guess that's just like with any interpersonal relationships, there's definitely really easy ones that's just like, this is golden. You have to know how much I love you. Like, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
And then there's ones where it's like, oh my God, I still just don't know what they want, So it's trying to cultivate the ones that do work. And then when you do find the ones that don't, then, well, maybe just move on and try to find more of the ones that do.
I don't want to put you in a corner, so not specifically any companies is what I'm asking about, but like, can you tell what is similar about the clients that are very easy to work with? Like, is there something about the way that their company is structured? Do they already like do a lot of visual stuff? Like, is there any common thread, or is it just sort of luck of the draw?
There's some red flags that'll happen. Like if you're talking to somebody and, if we find we have to convince them that they need us, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Or if they're like, oh, so-and-so said I need design. Like, okay, so there's some red flags run into where like my gut's telling me this isn't the right fit, right? So that is one benefit for us being small is after conversations like that, Greg and I'm like, there's something just it's not clicking. I'm not, sometimes you just can't put your finger on it, but you just know we're not on the same page.
Yeah.
Which is totally fine because there's plenty of other people that can be on the same page. That's like the ideal where you want to be able to be in that position and say, I think we're not the right fit for this project, right? It isn't anything like, oh, big companies don't work. It's not like that at all. I think it comes down to just I think it's an interpersonal thing.
Yeah. And you didn't go into this like specificity of work and small company that you have just sculpted to then like ever try to convince people that they need you, right? Like, yeah.
When we started working, we would do that. We're like, I think this didn't work because we had to convince them, right? Like we learned the hard way for sure.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, it's really nice to hear about all these things that makes Anvil so great and how you implement design for like a variety of partners successfully. I think we really love to ask our guests individually, like what makes them special and unique and what they're bringing to design that only they can do. And we're asking you to brag a little bit about yourself.
Me specifically or versus Anvil?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, you guys, that's... I think one of my strengths is being a creative director. Like I feel pretty comfortable and I really enjoy the aspects when I do have, especially the bigger projects where I'm sketching on it, Greg's sketching on it, and a couple of it are like, occasionally I'll have interns, and I love having interns on because they're so fresh. They have such cool ideas. It's just so nice. And then our contractors, and then just looking at everybody's, and I just love like curating the story and figuring out what the right solution is across a breadth of different ideas. Like it's really fun to look at all that and I have a pretty good knack too for when we're doing that of like, we'll put things together and I'll be like, okay, Greg, I think they're going to go for concept 8, and he's like, oh no, I really like 6. And I'll be like, I always kind of do a little happy dance like, yeah, I called it. So that's not really quite a superpower though. And I think there are lots of creative directors in the world, but I think that's like something that I am pretty good at. Identifying what the need is and then identifying what the right solution is for the design objective, regardless of whose hand it came from. And that's what I really like about the collaborative approach is that it isn't just one person. It's seeing a breadth of ideas or seeing how ideas could be combined from completely divergent ways of thinking to like, actually, that's what the answer is. Like that, I get really excited about that. That's super fun.
Some people call it like ability to make decisions based on taste and intuition. I think this is a little bit what creative direction is about.
I was thinking it's very much like you take a lot of material, like it's a fire hose of design to have, all your like high-level contractors and interns and have people come together to work on the same thing and thread that into something meaningful. Certainly everyone's walked into a design classroom and there's just like 100 sketches on the wall, and it's totally just, it's not garbage. It's really cool. So hard to just like take it in, right? Well, sometimes it's garbage, but like it's just so much, and it needs to be distilled, it needs to be guided, it needs to be packaged nicely to tell a real story, or else, especially a non-designer can't use it. That's a total skill, and it's a total superpower, I think.
That's the ability to converge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To synthesize all the stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. We didn't quite get you to brag about yourself, but it was close. I will take it.
What do you think, Margaret? Is it time for your secret question?
Secret question!
It's not secret. Treasure knows about it.
Well, if you have a different one, because if you ask me another one, I do need to look it up.
We have to ask.
We do need to ask the question.
So, you were very excited, I know. But you hinted to us that you actually had some experience with like a color lab recently. So let's put it on the table. What is your favorite color, Treasure?
Well, it's like a really kind of like a steel blue, kind of like a industrial blue, but also it kind of mixes with like that blue, the blue hour,
What is the blue hour?
After dusk. Maybe that's in Germany. It's when it's after. I think it's just dusk. It's just everything is blue. It's beautiful.
I thought that's when you're depressed and consider killing yourself. But okay.
Oh.
That's just feeling blue, Margaret.
Oh no! To end on a happy note. Yeah.
I'm not a native English speaker. Okay, the dusk hour blue. Can we call it like a twilight blue? Because we're in Seattle and Fox is just 3 hours away.
It's kind of like it's like the color of like a gray, cloudy day on the Dutch coast at twilight. How's that?
Amazing.
So specific,
yes.
beautiful.
It's like a steel blue. And I was at this place 2 weeks ago, Tone Studios, and he has this amazing color system. And like the whole thing is just all of these just beautiful fans of colors. And I was like, I looked at the blue and I pulled out one and it told me exactly what it was. Like, how you make it and everything. And I can't find it. Now that I'm all excited to like tell people about this.
Sounds like a nice color.
It's just a very nice, beautiful steel, like a Pacific blue, but not quite as green as a Pacific blue, a little bit more.
Do I need to paint one of my walls that color?
It would be a nice one. Yeah, it might be too depressing for a wall.
All of your walls?
You've caught on. I like that. You'd be sad in my home or something.
No, I took all these fans, and now the only picture I have is the white fan. And it's not a shade of white, it's a shade of blue.
I have such a ludicrous amount of photos on my phone that are just pictures of nice forms or colors or like textures in the world. It's just like I fill up my Google storage over and over again.
Good for you. I have only pictures of my dog.
My pictures are combined. I'm scrolling through here. There's my son, cool art forms, just like you're saying, and my dog. These are the 3 things that are important. Yeah.
That sounds cute.
Very cool.
If I had a dog.
Some cool, vases here that you don't care about, but yeah.
Everything that matters. While you look for the photo, do you want to tell us what your favorite kind of chocolate is? You seemed very excited about
definitely. That. Oh, okay. So we mold these chocolates in the shape of anvils. Ginger said she got one at the IDC. And we did those in Issaquah. There's a chocolatier here, a Swiss chocolatier here. And I'm from the Seattle area, so I've been going to Bohm's since I was a kid.
I knew it was Bohm's.
I love that we use them. And they have this really yummy, like, German chocolate nugget. I think it's like dark chocolate with nugget inside, something like that. It's just amazing. It's so good. That's my favorite chocolate.
Yeah, I got one of those anvils as well, and I was like circling around it in the evening. I was like, is it good? I was like, let's let's try it. And I ate all Anvil.
How did you destroy it? Did you take a hammer?
No, I just like took a little bit and then I was like,
Oh, nice.
I ate it in one evening.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Sorry, it was like good. I just took it and I ate it, and I was like, I did not expect that.
That's a
I thought
really
it would be
big
like,
piece of chocolate.
something else. We're in the US, like sweets often are like below my expectations, but I just took the Anvil and like ate it. I was like, okay, like let's.
Did
just
you get the milk chocolate or the dark
milk chocolate?
Okay, 'cause we did
milk
50-50.
chocolate. And I was like, okay, let's just forget about this incident.
I did the dark chocolate. I made it last like a week. It was just little chunks at a
Little
time.
slivers, yeah.
I ate the whole thing at once. It was good.
We have some people who just hit it with a hammer and it shatters, and I was just like, I love that.
Very satisfying.
Yeah, I didn't think about it. I don't have a hammer, but I just ate.
That's cool. That sounds delicious. This is maybe my main mistake by not going to the conference, is that I didn't get a big piece of chocolate. Jealous.
Well,
Very jealous.
Bohm's, if you live near Issaquah, Bohm's is the Swiss chocolatier. It's amazing. So good.
That's right.
I will have to try that. Really, really good chatting with you. Is there anything else that you want to
I
mention?
don't know. I've never been interviewed before, so you know.
Usually we end with if anyone listening wants to contact you on like social media.
Yeah, LinkedIn I think is the best one. It's the one I look at most, I guess. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, and if you want to find our group, it's our new website, thebeyondraypodcast.com, and our Instagram is WID_Seattle.